Yeah. Okay.
Hey y'all.
Oh, are we live already? Dang.
Yeah,
I don't always miss
that's
that.
I was like, I'm getting the countdown. Hey Tintin.
What's up? What's up?
What's going
How's
on?
it going?
Oh, y'all looking so beautiful
Thank you.
So
and revolutionary.
so
You know what I'm saying?
elegant, looking like a wow.
That wasn't rehearsed, was it?
No, but we say it to Sankara a lot.
Yes. Hey y'all. So we have a few things, a little housekeeping, Tintin, then we'll hop into the interview. But good to see you, y'all. This is our guest on this lovely Juneteenth morning. Where's your food? Where's your drink, man?
It's brunch.
It's brunch.
Water, boo.
Are you at work on top of that?
Well, I had to come to a place where I can just, get some lighting and be in silence. So
Well, unfortunately, you're missing out on the chicken and waffles.
Yes.
I heard them forks and plates. You know what I'm saying?
Chicken, waffles, eggs. We got our little mimosa.
Mm-hmm.
I heard the little baby in the background.
Yes.
I feel like I was at a family reunion. You know?
Not the plate simply. You know what that made me think about? The time that we had Femi on, then there was the dishes in the background.
Oh my God, his partner was like washing dishes or something. It was very crazy.
I think other people didn't hear it as much as we did, but
like, get the dishwasher. What is you doing? You have me to syrup, y'all.
Yes.
So we eating, we drinking, sipping on a little something. Feel me? Nothing.
Wait,
crazy.
so who's the chef though? But did you hook this up or did you got catered?
No. Lay look
well,
good.
Sharice don't want to show you her plate. Her plate look better than mine.
Oh yeah, show it.
I knew it was on when I heard. Do you have any hot sauce?
Oh, you already know.
Oh, you was already on when she asked.
See, y'all, chicken
that's
to
official.
chocolate waffle.
Yes.
Homemade fried chicken, eggs. Of course, I gotta have my hot sauce on mine because that's how I roll.
And it's a natural chicken. Chocolate waffle. I made it with cocoa powder. It's not like some crazy artificial stuff, But
yeah. Somebody knows me from San Francisco State. Chitamacha 1025 said, "Oh my God, SFSU in the house, Dr. Tinson."
Oh, well, you know it.
Yeah. Come on, curls. Picture.
Oh, what are you talking about, curls?
All right, y'all. We have a lot to talk about this Juneteenth, so let's just go ahead and get started. Yes. Grab your drink or your drinks. Grab your food. But of course, in terms of life updates, we just want to let y'all know that after this episode, we'll be taking our summer break for a few weeks.
Yeah.
We don't know how long, but we're taking a break. So we gave you a solid 15 episodes. That's a long season 1.
More than likely, you will probably come back for Black August.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
On to the comments.
Okay, so the first is from Librarian. Oh, that's the red vines all day. That's you and Sharice, because them things were gross to me. What do you say? By the way, what citation managers do you both use?
Word.
I don't use a citation
Microsoft Word.
So.
I don't. Y'all, we're so raggedy. Like, I literally do all my citations by hand still. Like, I should have a manager. Tintin, do you use like Scrivener or anything like that?
I tried to about 10 years ago, and I just felt like it was a waste of my time.
See, I use Scrivener to write, but I don't necessarily use it to manage my research.
What's the other one? Zotero.
Yeah,
It
was, and then when we were in graduate school, it was another 2 or 3. I can't remember what they were, but yeah, I've tried a bunch of different ones. I've just never really gotten into any of them personally.
I'm still personally the yellow pad guy that writes stuff out before I even type it. So
okay,
very old school. To be honest, I cite so much of the same stuff because that's the foundation of my work that my citation manager is my previous work. So a lot of times I could just copy and paste the citation from, and I think I have a huge document that has like so many just the citations, some annotations. So yeah. So Muhammad Ali said, thanks for the answer, Layla, and really enjoyed learning from Jesus. Interesting interview.
Thanks for tuning in as always. Okay, Michael T. I think so this you said, oh no, and what's happening? I think that's in relationship to the blood clot that I had. Because I think you said that at the beginning of last week. At this point, things are cool. I don't have no more pain in my leg. They said it would, they said it would pass on its own because it was in a superficial vein. So it seems that it has. Although I still have a little bit of bruising on my leg, but I don't feel it like that anymore. So
all right.
I was going to ask a question about a superficial vein and the kind of definition of what that might mean.
So there's a difference between
a vein from LA. I'm just playing. Kidding. LA people don't come for me.
So, deep vein thrombosis is when those veins will, if a blood clot breaks off in those, that's when they worry about a pulmonary embolism or something, because it can go to one of your major arteries. But the superficial veins, they're not worried about the clots breaking up and going to sorry, did I say major arteries? I meant major organs. So they're not worried. They weren't worried about it breaking up. I didn't have to be put on blood thinners to break it up. So that the clot didn't go to an organ. So it was fine, I guess. But I'm still annoyed have the doctor dealt with it. I'm annoyed because she sent me home with muscle sprain paperwork, and I told that heifer I had a blood clot. I was like, I was an athlete. I was a swimmer. I played volleyball, ran track. I know what a muscle sprain feels like, and this ain't no damn muscle sprain. But anyway, that's beside the point.
Glad you're doing all right.
Thank you.
Yes. So for our reading challenge update, y'all, I think it's over there. I listened on Audible to Decolonial Marxism here, which of course I have read. I have read the majority of it because I was supposed to write a review of it that I never wrote because I'm lazy now. But so I listening back through it was really interesting. There's a lot of stuff that got me thinking about. His discussion of Uganda was particularly interesting, and the Uganda left and the way that they analyze their material conditions. I love to hear Walter Rodney talk about Tanzania, the strength and weaknesses of Ujamaa. So it was really good. I didn't get to reading anything, y'all. I'm not going to lie. I found this channel called Trap Lore Ross.
Oh, God.
And it got me in a chokehold. I've been following the beef between O-Block and what is it? Something World. Anyway, y'all, it's a whole thing. I've been watching those documentaries. Not only that, I subscribe to the man Patreon so I can get the uncut videos, because the stuff like the documentaries he puts on YouTube, the stuff is too graphic. So I wanted to see the videos. So right now I'm watching the murder of what is it? FMB Duck. I'm getting the names wrong, but I'm ovaries deep in this. It got me in a chokehold, but I'm gonna get back to reading this.
Ovaries
week,
deep.
So I'm not gonna lie. It's summer. I'm catting off, but I'm gonna get back. I swear.
Well, I did not finish the book, but I've restarted. Those of you who watched LDI, there was a time when I was talking about this book, but I wanted to return to this book because this is The Communism of Love, an inquiry into the poverty of exchange value. And this particular book, I'm returning to it because of some personal things happening in my life. And one of the things that, my dad is a person that really pushes the way that everything is political, whether it be our interpersonal relationships, the types of decisions that we make. And so I'm trying to reconcile some ideas about what it means. Oh Lord, y'all, I done burnt the last waffle. I forgot I even put it in.
I know, I remember.
I was curious.
It would be, you were curious and you didn't even look. Just unplug it. Anyway, so in trying to have some conversations with the person that I am in partnership now with about like relationships and love and value, and particularly like what is the worth of men. Because I think so many.
I'm just
you a mess.
They're very worthy,
of course,
everything
and that's the struggle that we're actually having. I think a lot of men are because of capitalism, their ideas about masculinity are so tied up in the amount of money they make or don't make, and a lot of times men are valued for what it is that they do for people as opposed to their relationships to one another. And so this is something that I'm trying to. That's not my issue. That is my partner's issue. I'm trying to help him dispel some of these ideas, which I think are toxic and misandrous and anti-Black and all these things about his own masculinity. So that is why I have returned to the Communism of Love. And it is a chunky book, y'all. It's not a light read. So I obviously did not finish this. So I will be probably reporting on this when we come back in August.
So yeah, no, not Zay talking about, monetizing and making fun of Black death from way across the pond. I hear you on that. And I also, that's how I feel about, I don't know if y'all know 1090 Jake. Anyway, listen, I'm ratchet. I am. I can't help it.
This is still your prison YouTube. So.
But yes. But so,
okay.
so I feel that. And so I will be unsubscribing, taking away my $2 a month once I watch all the documentaries I want to watch. But it's definitely a problematic fave. And then Craig Bardo had asked about what I feel about his discussion of Nkrumah. I think it's apt. So I've read different iterations of, so he had something in the archives, like, so different iterations of his analysis of Kwame Nkrumah and his ideological development. And I tend to agree, right? So I think, basically he says that Nkrumah sort of missed the mark until he got overthrown in 1966. And that's when he started to take a class analysis seriously, among other things. But he also thinks that, he classifies Nkrumah as like a genuine person who was articulating African socialism. So he thought there was a lot of charlatans who were talking about quote unquote African socialism. And Nkrumah
didn't believe in African socialism.
Right. And so, but he saw conscientism as a sort of early iteration of that. So like trying to combine scientific socialism with something else based on this idea that Marx, that there has to be a particular type of African articulation. And so I tend to agree with Rodney's assessment. I think he's fair, and Rodney's always like judicious. So yeah, and I think he takes Nkrumah seriously, and he actually studies these people that he's critiquing. He's not just offering some random, it's not shade. I think he's actually being serious and genuine, trying to figure out like what's happening on the continent. So.
We also, when Sharice and I did the monthly review session on conscientism, we actually had a more in-depth conversation about this because I think we do have some disagreements about the way Rodney reads Nkrumah. And partially, I think for me, there is a difference between an intellectual, a scholar, and a statesman. And I think there are different issues that Nkrumah was up against as a statesman that he was able to reflect on differently when he was no longer a statesman. And so I think that some of that also impacts that reading too, in terms of the way he was making decisions and how he was moving. And also like once he gets out of office, the way he's able to reflect on that. So that pamphlet that I mentioned that I read last weekend, not pamphlet, but the booklet of the 6 pamphlets by Nkrumah that are kind of taking him from I think the first one was written in like 46, and then the latter ones were written in like 66 when he was already in exile. And you can really see the progression of his own thought from when he was a student, as a philosophy student in the U.S. until his sort of early statesman days, and then once he's ousted, and when he's living in exile in Guinea.
I think that's Rodney's argument that there's a development in his idea from conscientism to Nkrumhism to a Marxism Leninism. So I think that he does take seriously like the ways that he's engaging Marxism Leninism and how class struggle, once he's in Guinea and he is overthrown, he's able to reflect, I think, more concretely on class formation as well as like class contradictions in Ghana, but in Africa more broadly.
I just don't know that I would put, like, I think Nkrumah would identify as being influenced by Marx. I just don't know that I would put him all the way as a development towards Marxism, as if his early attempts to reconcile sort of African, like indigenous African culture with what he's thinking about class stuff is, I don't know that I see that same progression in the same kind of way, because I don't necessarily see him moving towards Marxism. I see him as having been informed by it all throughout his entire process, but I think early on he was trying to offer up something that was more indigenous to African folks.
I think he's moving toward a more, he's moving toward a more classical scientific socialism, even as Africa is still his locus of enunciation. But I mean, that's what I read to be Rodney's argument. So, but yeah. Is that it?
Mm-hmm. Wait a minute. So Communism Love, no, it's not an edited volume. It's a monograph.
A monograph.
It is not an edited volume at all.
what is it, Bobby Hill? He looked just like Bobby Hill, bro. Y'all just okay, but don't engage any of this. What are we eating for brunch? We're having Layla made chocolate waffles, fried chicken, and scrambled eggs. You bring it over?
That's great.
Hey, Mama.
Yes, that's what we're eating. And then we have mimosas. Do we need her bottle? Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, y'all. My partner's here helping.
Mama.
This is Sankara. She's having breast milk for brunch because that's how she rolls.
The cleanest food.
Yeah, it's the most perfect. All right, y'all. So on to our conversation about Juneteenth. So as y'all know, it is Juneteenth, and that means different things to different people. And so we're actually going to watch a little clip from Gerald Horne that I think gives a assessment of Juneteenth that probably we haven't heard of because it's Gerald Horne and who's heard of anything he's talked about. But and then we're going to have a broader discussion with our amazing Black Studies historian, Dr. Chris Tinson, whose teaching and research focuses on histories of Africana radical traditions, Black protest movements, U.S. ethnic studies, incarceration, and race in sports. His writings and reviews have been published in The Black Scholar, The Feminist Wire, Radical Teacher, Equity and Excellence in Education, Souls, and Black Perspectives, among others. His first book, entitled Radical Intellect, Liberator Magazine, and Black Activism in the 1960s, is published with UNC Press and actually won, it won the, whatever the AAIHS award is. What's it called? Is it not IDB? What is it?
Pauli Murray.
The Pauli Murray Book Award, BOW. So, and Tinson is a highly sought after speaker and mentor who has led professional development workshops and lectured at numerous college campuses, high schools, and carceral institutions. So to start, y'all, we're going to play this clip. Gerald Horne is being interviewed by Brian Becker while he's sort of explaining, giving an overall explanation of Juneteenth. And then we're just going to start with some of our initial remarks on that clip. It should be queued up.
Oh.
Okay.
Is it queued up on top here?
It's just let's see. Okay. Sorry, y'all.
I have to stop sharing again to share the right one. It's 4 minutes, right?
Yeah, it's like 3:50.
Oh, what is this? Why is it not letting me just push ahead?
Oh, bummer.
This is very annoying.
Y'all know we're technologically in that.
Well, it's because it's trying to. It wants me to a SoundCloud account. Why won't it just play it?
You probably can. It just will have to be from the beginning. So it's like 3:50. Oh, God damn it. No. You're gonna have to make an account if we skip forward. Sorry, Tinson.
It's all good. Live radio, live streaming. This is what you got to do with.
Oh my God.
All right. Okay, now let me reshare the screen. Yeah, we're gonna get it together, I promise.
Yeah, okay, yes, that's exactly what it
is. It's the StreamYard one.
Okay, here we go.
The new federal holiday, Juneteenth, the first new federal holiday since the Martin Luther King holiday enacted in January 1983. However, I'm afraid to say that the backstory that has been presented to the public about Juneteenth oftentimes is as obscurantous and ignorant as Mr. Trump's remarks that you quoted. To put it briefly, you are told that General Granger of the Union Army shows up in Galveston on June 19th, 1865, to tell the enslaved, you're free. What is not imparted to the US public is that this takes place in the context of a so-called surrender by the Confederate States of America in April 1865. However, they plan to decamp to Texas to make a hopefully final stand. That is to say that they would make a stand there that would be extinguished. Jefferson Davis, the leader of the Confederacy, was actually captured en route to Texas. Texas was the Confederate state least damaged during the U.S. Civil War. During the course of the U.S. Civil War, you had slave owners from Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, taking their so-called enslaved property into Texas. The number of Black people in Texas expanded exponentially from 1861 to 1865 during the U.S. Civil War. That's one of the many reasons why even today, Texas has the largest Black population in the United States of America, 3.9 million, a figure that dwarfs the size of the population in a number of U.S. states. And so the idea was not only to continue the Civil War from Texas, but recall as well another holiday, a Cinco de Mayo, which marks a Mexican victory over the French, who had seized Mexico opportunistically during the U.S. Civil War. Texas had seceded from Mexico, recall, in 1836, because Mexico had moved to abolish slavery under a president of African descent, speaking of Vicente Guerrero. However, by 1865, the idea was not only for Texas to continue enslavement of Africans in the so-called Lone Star State, but for Texas to rejoin French-backed Mexico, and for French-backed Mexico to overturn the 1829 decree that had abolished slavery. This plan may have succeeded, but for the fact that General Granger, and this is oftentimes lost in the obscurantist narrative, ultimately he was accompanied by thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of so-called colored troops. And on one side of the border, the Texas side, they acted as an anvil, as from the other side of the border, speaking of Mexico, you had the forces led by Benito Juarez. Recall that the twin city of El Paso, Texas, Ciudad Juarez, is named in his honor. They were pressing from the south against the French-backed forces in Mexico like a hammer, whereas on the other side of the border, the so-called colored troops were an anvil. And that squeeze ultimately led to the defeat of the French forces in Mexico, despite the fact that the French, who had colonized Algeria in 1830, had brought across the Atlantic thousands of Algerian troops, not to mention that the French exerted influence in Cairo and had brought across the Atlantic as well a significant number of Egyptian Sudanese troops. And so this is also a story of Pan-Africanism and conflict with Black forces on either side of the border. Another Juneteenth that should be marked is June 19th, 1867, when the French puppet leader, Maximilian, is captured and executed by the progressive Mexican forces. And that puts paid to this diabolical scheme to continue enslavement of Black people in Texas and in Mexico. So in other words, Juneteenth is a stirring story of Black-brown unity. It's a stirring story of transnationalism, cross-border cooperation, etc. But somehow that has been lost in the hurry to construct yet another so-called white savior narrative, featuring this time General Granger showing up to enlighten the supposedly unenlightened Negroes that they were actually free, even though we know that the so-called Emancipation Proclamation of January 1st, 1863 did not apply, obviously, in jurisdictions where the Lincoln government had no authority, which they certainly did not have in Texas. It's like me issuing a decree banning drug dealing from the leadership in Honduras. My remit does not extend to Tegucigalpa, and so it has no relevance. And likewise, the Emancipation Proclamation had little or no relevance in Texas. So that's the actual story of Juneteenth, and hopefully it will emerge sooner rather than later.
Can you fast forward to 11? So one more little clip.
Black troops already.
The fiercest examples of class struggle in the history of North America. That is to say, the enslaved, sadly and tragically enough, are not often depicted as an oppressed class, which obviously they were, not oftentimes depicted as an exemplar of a cruel class relationship featuring the enslaved versus the slaveholder. And indeed, I think it's fair to say that the ferocity of the class struggle exemplified by those Black troops from 1862, 1863 to 1865 has been bequeathed to their descendants, who have just bequeathed yet another paid holiday to the entire working class, not just themselves. And this narrative about the enslaved.
Okay, y'all. So I just want to get Tintin, what are your initial thoughts on this? I have some, but like, what are your what are your initial thoughts?
I can't. Has he published it yet? I haven't read it.
Yeah, so it's in the Counter Revolution of 1836. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't read that one yet from Horn. But I love the internationalization of Juneteenth that he's putting forth. Is absolutely important for us to think about it in that way. As we go into our conversation, I can talk more about it, but no, I appreciate that analysis. And yes, I mean, I think one of the things that drops out immediately is, the role of Mexico in general, right? And the fact that when we talk about Juneteenth, we don't think about Mexico at all. And we forget that Galveston itself is right in the Gulf of Mexico. And the Gulf of Mexico was a major important port for the importation of enslaved folk from the United States and throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. So in that context, I think that this is an important conversation to have around how do we think globally about this so-called domestic holiday.
It's funny because the Jacobin piece that I shared with you all about Juneteenth and freedom, the emancipated Black man, what was his name, Felix Haywood. One of the things that he said is that people don't talk enough about. People were talking about running north. He said, really, we could have just walked south, but we didn't. He's like, and I don't really know why we didn't, but we could have. So it is something that is often not talked about. In the ways that it really should be when we think about what it means to have to deal with that moment as formerly enslaved people.
And in fact, this actually was a concern of the U.S. government. There's this sort of apocryphal, probably document called the San Diego Plan that was ostensibly about Japanese and Mexican and African Americans getting together to actually seize those 5 states in the U.S. South, as well as parts of Mexico, and get, for Black people to have emancipation. But it basically was a race war against the United States and against white supremacy. And so that actually was something that was taken, that was a source of fear for the U.S. government, is the role of Mexico and being able to escape. But the thing that I found most interesting about this is that what he said about the white savior mythology, because it's not just Granger, it's also Lincoln, right? Because what he said is that the Emancipation Proclamation did not even extend to these people in Texas, because Texas was independent. And so this idea that Granger came to let the Black folks know, like, oh, you're free now. So this idea of like Lincoln or Granger, or even 40 Acres and a Mule, who is that? General Howard. Being some sort of savior to Black folks really obfuscates the class character and the class struggle of Black folks throughout Black history, and how ordinary people are so often involved in freeing themselves. So.
Yeah, so I think it's certainly important to historicize it. I think one of the problems that we have in American society in general is just we only can take small bites of accurate history at a time. The one question that I was thinking the whole time is, this is a history that should already be in the mainstream, but because we do a terrible job of teaching history in depth in American society, and in fact, the absence of teaching an in-depth history actually supports Western imperialism, right? So you can achieve those goals by suppressing the history. And so I think that that's what we're encountering now. With this anti-CRT, anti-African American Studies AP anti-DEI, even though we know none of these things were complete in and of themselves and fully revolutionary or radical, but nonetheless, we're trying to democratize how we understand American society. So I think we're a casualty, American society is the casualty of that marginalization and ignorance. So I think Dr. Horn is always, on the spot, Johnny on the spot to correct the historical record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was General. Thank you, Craig Bardo. Yeah, General Sherman, not Howard.
Yeah,
Okay.
So I'm gonna ask. I'm sure that you have seen. I'm sure other folks have seen the spectacle of Juneteenth at the White House recently. Right. Yes.
Are you gonna show a clip of this?
I'm gonna try. Is it
Biden looking like
this?
more? No, click out of that. It's this one.
This
looking
one,
like
okay.
more dust than fucking man. He is rotting from the inside out.
Okay.
I'm sure.
All right. So, oh my God.
I don't want to love nobody but you. I don't want to love nobody but you.
Look at he is glitching. The man is glitching in real time.
I don't want to love nobody but you.
The black dude, like, bro. They've got to give you your adrenaline shot.
That also really irks me because I'm not even Christian, but I love gospel music and I love that song. Like that is one of my get up and go morning songs. So it annoys me so much that it's associated with that. But anyway, so in that, if folks listen to the rest of that interview with Becker and Dr. Horn, one of the things that Becker mentions later on in the interview is this battle for consciousness that the U.S. government is really playing for, its citizens. And I think we see a particular example of that when it comes to Palestine at this moment. But I'm curious about this particular spectacle and what do you make of the decision to hold a Juneteenth celebration at the White House, particularly as it relates to this battle for consciousness? What does it mean for the U.S. government to be trying to hold this critical moment in our history as something that they really haven't ever respected, but now are attempting to commemorate and celebrate?
Yeah, no, I think that this is the kind of residual effects of the Obama era, right? Where they're trying to still cling to those cultural markers and, symbolic gestures that the Obama administration, used to perform regularly, that many of us were swept up by, many of our community, were swept up by, whether you're talking about everyday folk, bus drivers, barbershop, people at the church, love those kind of symbolic gestures, you know what I mean? And so that's all they were. I wish I could have got that 30 seconds of my life back that you just showed me, you know what I'm saying? Because I saw it on social media, but I didn't want to watch any of it because I knew it looked terrible. And so I also saw one clip of Porter, who's in that kiss. Does he kiss?
Yes. Yes.
So I think this is all just a tragedy, quite honestly, because one of the things that when we think about this history of Juneteenth, which is really censoring enslavement, censoring the Civil War, and censoring Reconstruction, the one question that all African Americans, formerly enslaved folk, had to answer is, how do I get resources to live on? And that's the same question that we're asking right now. So these performative gestures at the White House do nothing about the resource reallocation, do nothing about the question of reparations. And so anytime we have these events, I'm always just waiting to hear where the reparative justice is coming in. Where's the reparation coming in? Mm-hmm. And so I know that that's a debate, and I'm sure you guys covered that on the show before, but I just think that this is an issue of resources, not an issue of performance. Mm-hmm. And so that's the question that was at the heart of what happens with freed men and women. And how do they secure American citizenship, which is itself, the reason why even that performance is available to us is because after the Civil War and even during the Civil War, African Americans are having to choose to battle with this question of American citizenship and as their own identity. Mm-hmm. And it kind of puts us in that trajectory of asserting ourselves as Americans from that point forward. Yeah. And going back to Galveston and thinking about Texas, Mexico, even well before the Civil War, you had many African communities leaving Texas, fleeing across the border. It was well known that that was a place of escape. And so there are still to this day African descendant communities that are descendants of those escapees. And they even have annual celebrations on Juneteenth in Mexico, celebrating African heritage there. So I think that that's an important piece that we forget about when we're thinking about Galveston, Texas, places like San Antonio. Very, very Black spaces, Black culture are still alive in those spaces today as a result of that early history. The Biden administration doesn't want to do anything with that history, and that's the part, because it raises the questions of imperialism, it raises the questions of U.S. militarism, right? And it raises the question of this hemispheric sovereignty that the United States wants to have, over this part of the world. So I think that that's an important part of this whole question.
Yeah, and I mean, this, like you said, the notion of this performative gesture that. So obviously, we understand what the White House is doing. I think what is more of our concern, what's more of my concern, is why do we keep buying into it? Why do we think that performative gesture means anything in a material sense in terms of what our futures will look like, and also what does it look like up against the particular kinds of paths that we've had in this country, and why do people keep being so excited about such foolishness? And I'm not asking you that. Those are just
I know
constantly, circulating in my mind.
I think it points to this other contradiction, because there's this overriding narrative that like Black women and femmes keep saving democracy. Yes. What does it mean to keep saving a democracy that, to paraphrase the mighty George Jackson, reduces us to butchered half-lives? What does it mean for part of that savior of democracy to be Stacey Abrams bound to this goofy motherfucker? Billy Porter kissing, literally kissing the ring. What does that actually mean in real terms? Because when we're talking about Black women saving democracy, they're not talking about Black grassroots women. They're not talking about women like Ella Baker. They're not talking about, people organizing on the ground. They're talking about these handkerchief heads who are, or people who are the voter dyers or the blue no matter who type people. And so I think that again, Porter, Abrams, and this whole, first of all, the celebritization of all of this shit in general points out like that real contradiction. How do we continue to save this thing that is not even what it purports to be?
Yeah, and I think that's the excellent question. And I don't even know if it's a question of saving democracy as such. I think in the 19th century, the question of how do you, basically assert citizenship and wrestle a notion of democracy from the clutches of white supremacy was the struggle of the freedmen, right? Freedmen and women. I think now when we say they've saved democracy, like Stacey Abrams and what she was doing in Georgia and that kind of stuff, and I think other people like other Democratic kind of operatives, if you will, or
Marilyn Mosby as
that's right, and thinking about people like even people who are behind the scenes like a Simone Sanders, right, and people like that. What they're doing now is less about saving democracy and more about, which is unstated, but this is just I'm trying to interpret it, with us here right now, is they're trying to push back, I think, neo-fascism more than they are trying to save democracy as such. Because democracy as such has been a warped entity for a very long time. It's been a non-serving entity for Black people for a very long time. We've known that we've only gotten crumbs from what's called American democracy at every single interval since the Civil War. Okay, and so I think that's not lost on Black people. And so this idea that we also have in our culture of, hey, take what you can get, comes from this idea that democracy is not fully serving us. And so I think that when you can flip a state like Georgia, or you can get out the vote and do all this kind of stuff, that's really about pushing back the fascists more than it is about saving something that's already broken down. I don't think, but they're not gonna explicitly state it as such. But I think that there is this kind of this flirtation with neo-fascist discourses that we're seeing within the right wing, and that's where their articulations of American citizenship is to kind of be a, kind of like be a filter for that, like push back against that. But I don't think that they're saving democracy at all, because think about it. If Trump has 3 Supreme Court appointees and Biden only has 1, what good is the quote unquote saving of democracy if the right wing still runs the Supreme Court? So I don't think that they've because I think for the right wing, that is the prize. The Supreme Court is the prize. So when we think about American democracy, I think that in those ways, their fight is probably against a more assertive, overtly anti-Black, right, overtly white supremacists. They're fighting against those kind of energies, and less against the more nefarious, insidious, just everyday workings of democracy, which is not producing much material advantage for Black people.
But I think that one might argue, I would argue that defending a broken, backward liberalism actually creates the conditions for the rise of a neo-fascism, because historically, U.S. liberalism has been much more amenable to fascism than to communism or socialism. We know this, right? I wrote a book about it. But so at what point do we? It's like, if we're going to get crushed anyway, at one point do we do the radical thing? Yeah. At what point do we stop trying to curry favor, or simply just stop the bleeding and actually do what must be done? Discover your humanity and your love and revolution, again, as George Jackson would say. So next question, that relates to what we've been talking about. Whose interest does it serve to offer a distorted narrative of Juneteenth and other examples of Black history, for that matter, that evade the role of Black folks in class struggle, i.e. in Reconstruction, until Du Bois writes the magnum opus Black Reconstruction, and the role of Pan-Africanism and internationalism in our struggle? So even the eras that we lift up, like Black Power, oftentimes the internationalism, the Pan-Africanism is sort of sidelined, right? As if that's not an integral part of our struggle. So again, like, who does this distorted narrative serve?
Comfort of white liberals. It's real simple. I mean, I think that they, I think that anytime we're trying to mainstream something, mainstream our presence in American history, there's pushback, right? There's blowback, there's pushback. I think the closest thing we come to that was, in the 40s, when John Franklin first starts writing his historical books on, from slavery to freedom, right? Like, I mean, in terms of trying to mainstream just a narrative African-American history that most Americans would never get close to. Right. And so I think that a watered down narrative of Juneteenth is serving people who just want to believe in America, want to have the religion, what we can call the religion of America, right? This idea that it is going to give us some promise. It does hold out promise. It does hold out hope. And it's just a belief, whether you have material evidence or not. It's just a belief system that is part of the culture. So it definitely services that. And then it services capital in the sense that, last year, this time, I saw some company, I can't think of the company, but they created a Juneteenth ice cream. And just for the Freudian slip of it, and all of your listeners would enjoy this, I almost said somebody created a Jim Crow ice cream. I almost said that. And I had to catch myself, and I said Juneteenth, but not a Jim Crow. But it might as well have been a Jim Crow ice cream, right? And so I think that that's the way in which, it's the same thing with Kwanzaa, and people, I know Kwanzaa is contested as well. But the point is that it's the same kind of energy that, can we sell this? Can we market this? Becomes the next good thing. And I think even some Black businesses, right, participate in this, right? And so
it's the freedom for me. You remember them places? It's the freedom for me.
Yo, right in my thing, I did a recruitment fair, like a college recruitment fair for NCCU, and it ended up being Jack and Jill. I didn't know it was Jack and Jill before I got there, but it is what it is. Right. But one of the, it was a college fair, and one of the employers, was Pfizer, and they had Juneteenth. I have it up in my damn car. They had Juneteenth water bottles for Pfizer. Like, what does Pfizer have to do with Juneteenth?
Yeah. So everything can be turned to commodity. right? And I think that that's the part that I think that there is an effort to listen. The serious parts of Juneteenth are how much of an accurate story can we tell about the moment, about the people in the moment, about the impact that it had on Texas, and the kind of reactionary aspects of Texas in response, because that's the part that creates modern society, right? I tell my students that when we think about the society that we inherit has more to do with the Reconstruction era than it does even enslavement itself, right? Enslavement itself provides conditions, but the Reconstruction era is when you get the district boundaries. It's when you get certain electoral procedures. It's when you get a court system that's set up state by state by state, right? And so the jails and prison systems and the penalties that come with all these things and the rewriting of laws. Of course, we have Code Noir, which is going back to the 16th, 17th century. But the point is that the modern formation of these things that we've inherited really start to get solidified through the Reconstruction period. And so the Texas that appears, 10 years after Reconstruction is the one that we should really be concerned with, because that's the one that really became vehemently anti-Black and by extension anti-Brown at the same time, right? Like that's where you're getting, some of your early xenophobic, views towards the southern border, right? Towards people in the southern border. So I think that that's, even though again that has a longer history as well, but this kind of like solidified, institutionalized anti-Blackness, anti-indigeneity as well, appears in this period in full force, and Texas and the rest of the states, rest of the countries, and rest of the country and the states in the South never look back from that. They never corrected for that. White supremacy. I always remind my students as well that the Civil War ends in 1865, and the Ku Klux Klan is born in 1866, right? So 1 year later, that's the response of white elite civil society. The response is to create the Ku Klux Klan, which is to undo, which is to terrorize and be the most anti-democratic force in response to the Union victory.
Yep. I think that's great.
Sankara is particularly talkative over here today.
I know, it's all good.
Okay, so Juneteenth is often it's funny because when I was looking for images for the like the thumbnail for this episode, and most of them said Juneteenth Freedom Day, and I was really struggling with finding. I was okay with Emancipation Day, but Freedom Day was really bothering me. And I think part of it is because of what freedom means and our lack of, I think, shared understandings of what freedom is. So in the immediate aftermath of the proclamation, General Gordon Granger advises freedmen to remain quiet at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at the military post and that they will not be supported in idleness there or elsewhere. So basically, he's telling them, work for your old masters, don't gather together, especially at places which were closer to freedom, which is one of the quotes that the Felix Haywood mentioned earlier that I mentioned before. And so what I want to talk about now is, after the Emancipation Proclamation, we know that sharecropping becomes one of the ways that Black people newly experience a form of unfreedom after so-called slavery ends. And so what I wanted to talk more about is like, what does this occasion of Juneteenth and the sort of multifarious nature of unfreedoms that we have help us? How does it help us to understand what those unfreedoms are and what life is like for Black folks with those various new creations of unfreedom in the post sort of slavery moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the main point of contestation was, if we free Black people, or if Black people free themselves, what do we call them? And I mean that in the sense of, are they American now? Like, are they citizen now? Are they just some human roaming, the United States? And so that, because if you answer the question with yes, they are American citizen, then the question has to be asked, well, what does the citizen have? And the citizen has rights. And so that question was the one that scared them the most out of even, obviously miscegenation, even though they were raping everybody they could. Obviously the question of arming folks and perhaps a revolution against them, right? And so they were terrified of that, but it hinged on this question of citizen. It hinged on this question of if we lose, are they now citizen? And that idea that they have to treat them with some equality was a repulsive idea, right? It was an absolute repulsive idea. So I think that even when we get into a wage labor system, that idea of you're not equal to me is baked into that. So it never intended, even when you're structuring a free society, they never intended to treat newly freed men and women as equal citizens. Because of that, they're not going to pay them right. They're not going to give them opportunities, right? And so it's not going to be equal across the board. Of course, you're going to have some, books written about people that did, kind of manage to get their life and get some footing under themselves and their families. But by and large, it was a system of exploitation. And the idea, and Du Bois says this in Souls, where you're going to walk society back as close to slavery as possible without calling it slavery, right? And that's what the attempt was in that case. And there's numerous stories. He tells this story about Sam Hose in 1899. Where that's a wage dispute, right? Mm-hmm. That's a wage dispute where he's saying, look, I worked, and here's what I'm owed, and it turns into get off my lawn, essentially, right? It turns into a lynching, and so. But it starts as a wage dispute. And I try to emphasize this with my students because it's like, look, if African Americans are saying we'll go to war, but it's what comes with that is our freedom, what comes with that is rights, then that's the expectation. And you can't change people from that expectation. And so once they get into this new economic order, if you will, they're trying to be treated like human beings. But this other side, this elite who feels that they've lost a ton of power, and they have, in the sense of just having unfettered control over some other humans' lives, they have lost power, they have lost property, and so. But the United States government begins to protect property rights over the expansion of Black civil rights, or Black civic rights, and that's that's what happens through that period, and it becomes a very dark period. For a prolonged period of time. And one can say we're still in it, but the point is that for that immediate, end of the 19th century into the 20th, Black people's fortunes were dim.
The nadir, and it's important to note, and I write about this in my book, Following Rayford Logan, that the end of the Civil War was actually the greatest expropriation in U.S. history, because unlike places in the Caribbean or in Great Britain, for example, these slave owners were not remunerated. And so these people were trying to get their wealth back. Right. They're not only trying to get their lig back, right, physically, but they're actually trying to recuperate the massive amount of wealth that they lost through systems like debt peonage, sharecropping, convict leasing. It's literally like trying to wrest back as much profit as possible, let alone the inconceivable idea that you're going to be equal with somebody you just owned. Or if you didn't own any slaves, somebody that was just owned, and so I think there's both an economic, a psychological, social, and a political function that undergirds the nadir period.
Absolutely. And one of the things we could point to as well is the legal system, the way the legal system began to gel around this and began to kind of codify and regulate Black people's mobility in general, right? Yeah. And so even before the end of the Civil War, you have bands of police, what would be called police, making sure that Black people didn't escape to Mexico. For example, since we're talking about Texas and elsewhere, it was similar things, but it was, it was very much about, how do you How do you control this population through force, through physical restraints, through policy, social policy, through economics, obviously. One of the things that I think sticks out in this moment is the fact that, you would have people being sold in domestic slavery, and people coming from Alabama and being relocated to Texas, or people in Florida coming away to Texas. And all of that, is a mapping, if you will, of the slave regime, right? And so if you think about it in that way, you can see why the interests were trying to be protected the way that they were.
Yeah, so Kenyatta writes, but they rebelled against the state here rather than accepting the emancipation of Africans. Yeah, well, the United States rebelled against England rather than accept the emancipation of Africans. And so it was simply a change in political economy and a disposition of power, not a change in ethics. So
as one of our esteemed mentors, rest in peace, John Bracey, used to say, they had a revolution they want nobody else to have one after them.
Yep, exactly.
And I think that's, for me, that's what begs the question for us to be thinking about: what are the actual terms of our freedom? Like, what does freedom actually mean for us? Because freedom is more than just no longer being technically enslaved in that particular way. But I don't know that enough of us really have a sense of what freedom really means in a holistic way for us, as opposed to what the state has offered us and what we've been convinced is some form of freedom.
Well, that's like negative versus positive freedom, right?
Yeah.
So we have a sense of freedom from.
Yes, exactly.
But what's the freedom to, or to what end, right?
Let me ask y'all a question real quick. What do y'all think about, folks, like, and I know this was another symbolic gesture, but you just inspired this, Layla, in my thinking, was that when Stevie Wonder went back and got Ghanaian citizenship. And so when we talk about this question of free, for a long time, we've had, since over the 20th century, we've had, and even before that, 19th century, we've had different bands, if you will, or collectives of families relocating to the continent or moving to the Caribbean. What do y'all think about that as a kind of reverse migration, if you will?
I think that it's funny because we were talking about this in a party meeting recently. Like, what does it actually mean for the diaspora to be, what is it? Is it the sixth region? The sixth region, as opposed to keeping our efforts focused there. So I think that when we had progressive, radical, revolutionary governments on the continent of Africa, and people were moving back to Ghana, to Tanzania, to wherever, attempting to build a particular kind of project, I think that the stakes are very different then. I think now just having the citizenship, to me, that's still kind of a liberal individualism. It's about your freedom to move, but what's really happening in those countries? Because the thing is, like, a lot of people are relocating to Ghana right now, but Ghana is actually terrible in terms of its, in terms of its policies, financially. And what people don't realize is that a lot of those folks who are relocating expats, they are being relocated and they're being incentivized by the Ghanaian government to the detriment of the Ghanaian people, right? And so then again, that question about freedom is freedom to do what and freedom for whom? Because in that instance, our attempt to gain some kind of freedom or liberation from what we face here in the United States is further imposing an unfreedom on Ghanaian citizens, right? People who have born and lived there. And I don't think that any one person holds precedent, but I think that those are all complicated things that we have to think about. And so I don't know that in our particular moment, because of the current political state of Africa, what it means to have any kind of African passport other than for us as a place to get out of here. I don't really know what that means, because we've seen across Francophone West Africa in the last couple of years some attempts, but we still don't really know what is the nature of sort of revolutionary Africa at this moment. We're still trying to figure that out. And so that the repatriation is always a complicated thing. And I think it's something, I think we all would benefit from having that experience of going, visiting, whatever, and not in a touristy way. But I don't know that the citizenship at this point is doing what folks think that it is.
We also have to think about what is freedom for like the petty bourgeoisie actually mean, because who's able to actually go and get dual citizenship? Who's able to repatriate? And if we look at the content of, generally speaking, of diasporas here in the US, are we reproducing that same content? Because they tend to be more conservative. There's a reason why they're able to leave. They have particular types of resources, et cetera, particular orientation to especially socialist governments. And so it's like, are we reproducing those same type of dynamics when, so like we can repatriate, right? Stevie Wonder is very rich. He can repatriate. Du Bois wasn't super rich, but he was treated like a dignitary when he went. He's able to repatriate, right? And so like, what is that actually? That can't, it's not a sustainable, it's not like the Garveyist movement, which call it what you want, but that was for the folk, right? That's not what is happening currently. So I think that's something we need to talk about as well.
And I think even like, and there are all these weird parallels that are trying to do the work that were once thought of as revolution, like ECOWAS, right? Like there was an attempt by Nkrumah, Sekou Touré, Modibo Keita to create a system whereby people could move freely, that they weren't struggling over currencies and languages, but that's not the same as the economic community of West African states, right? And so there are all these ways that I think these early attempts to create continental unity, some kind of economic self-determination, have been usurped by the interest of capital at this moment, and they're not doing anything to really free us.
It's the same as from going from the OAU to the AU.
Exactly.
So sort of in this vein, like Juneteenth is now a national holiday. So we get paid time off. So I think something to think about is like, who does this time off actually benefit? When we think about work and we think about the constitution of labor, right? Who actually gets a day off? If you're working in the gig economy, you're probably working overtime, driving people to these barbecues and shit, right? Delivering groceries, etc. So there's also a question of like, who's actually benefiting from a paid day off? Like what types of jobs are benefiting from? But that notwithstanding, how can we make Juneteenth into a time for radical Black study, akin to, let's say, Black August, so as to prevent it from becoming another hollowed out holiday, like, for example, the transformation of MLK Day into a day of service? So, like, and it's cool to go pick up trash, to hand out backpacks and shit, but, like, how do we prevent Juneteenth, or can we, right? Once it's taken up by the federal government, are we ultimately beholden to however it's specified therein, and I guess what can we on the ground grassroots do to really make Juneteenth like meaningful?
What happened to our Harriet Tubman $20 bill? That's all I want to know. You know what I mean? What happened to that? Because they said Harriet, they had the mock up.
My tubs.
They had the mock up. You know what I'm saying? We saw the mock up. We didn't like the mock up, but we liked that she was on there. And I don't know.
From dubs to tubs.
No, because that's the height of what you're pointing out, right? You're pointing out the height of the contradiction of, wow, you got a commodified holiday that we're trying to rescue, right? Because we're serious about teaching history accurately, deeply, teaching about our culture, teaching about our experiences, not being marginalized, not being erased, not being unseen, not being killed off, right? Early or otherwise. And I think, it's just one of those things in this society is so ready to eat us up. And I think that kind of greedy nature, of the society, just, it just looks for what it can eat next, So I think for us, the best example would be, recommitting to deep study like Black August. I think even Black August, we need to do a better job of expanding Black August. I think that's an important thing that we need to do. But again, you even have some folks on our side who will say, well, hey, why are we always talking about prison abolition? What does prison abolition have to do with Juneteenth? And I think that those are the things that we need to really tie together, make visible, document, disseminate, and just have that on repeat. So it can be valuable. There's also the atonement piece, and there's also the meditative piece, that comes with Black August, and the kind of like solitary sit down, meditate, reflect piece of Black August as well that we should probably do. And I think, with Juneteenth in general, people probably celebrate it in different kind of ways, So I think we're building right here. Your community of listeners and viewers is building, and so I think there's some intentionality there. And I think the more we do this, the better. But, typically Juneteenth is just, a hangout, right? Like people just coming to celebrate each other, food, the whole thing. I do like the fact that Juneteenth comes before 4th of July, though, just based on the calendar. So I do think that that's kind of a one up that we could probably play on a little bit more. But I think doing it with some intentionality and some ethical sense of commitment to history, I think is our best bet at this point.
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge, like, even though Black people been celebrating Juneteenth, like, now granted, a lot of them parades got shot up. Oh my God. Nonetheless, we did, what I'm saying. And so it's always irritating. Like, we have our own ways of celebrating. And granted, they weren't always the most conscious things, right? It was oftentimes turn ups and selling the shea butters and all that type of thing. But we've been doing this, and now all of a sudden now, since it's a federal holiday, now people want to talk about Juneteenth. And in some ways it gets even worse.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it does.
Even more commodified when the whites get a hold to it. So,
and and one other thing I was just thinking about when I was thinking about the Felix Haywood character, my grandmother was a sharecropper in Dunn, North Carolina, and so if we're thinking particularly about the history and legacy of slavery, I mean, we are approaching generations who are no longer in contact with folks who had that life, who lived that type of life. And so I think one of those things I think that is important is to be able to use, if we are using Juneteenth as a family occasion, if we are using it as a way to, like, a proxy for a family reunion type of thing, then one of the things that I think we should be doing is trying to collect the stories of those of our folks who actually did live through those periods, because there is a lot of misinformation about people's experiences. And I'm sitting here, my grandmother passed in 2011, and I'm just sitting here myself regretting, even as an academic who ostensibly had all these skills to do these things, that I mute me well.
Oh my bad.
The mother instinct kicked in.
Right, I'm like, my bad. Yes.
I essentially said what I wanted to say, but just that I think that is one of the ways that we can utilize this particular holiday as a way to collect that information.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I think I want to challenge myself on is I don't know how we can do it, but we do need to. And maybe this is happening in Galveston, so I don't want to just act as if, it's not happening. But I think we should be really trying to connect across borders, really do that international work around Juneteenth, and maybe, having, some folks from Mexico, right, or indigenous communities really like thinking about how do we celebrate Juneteenth, because there is a Juneteenth celebration in Mexico. They don't call it Juneteenth as such, but there is a June 19th celebration of African descendants in Mexico. I think that's one thing that we could do to kind of just advance. Most Black folk are not Pan-Africanists, unfortunately, right? Right. They're missing out. They're missing out. You know what I'm saying? They're missing out. They're missing out. But the point is that most of us tend to be very, especially about these holidays, they be very, protective of these holidays. That generation that you're talking about, Layla, very protective. I, have my uncles in my family, very protective. Many of them have served in the military. So when things around military come up, there's this energy that they have, where it's like they don't want to necessarily critique everything so heavily. But you catch them some other time and they'll be talking all kinds of stuff about the government, right? But around these moments of commemoration, they tend to be very patriotic. I'll call small p patriotic, but just like a default patriotism. And I think that there's some space for that too. But I think really going back to the earlier point we started with, internationalizing it. And we have the immediate, border of Mexico right there that we can really do that work and really connect with people who are already of this consciousness. I think that will boost our understanding of this particular history for African Americans and the meaning for African Americans, and really get us thinking, whether we're from Kentucky or Louisiana or New York, North Carolina, wherever, that our story is really an international story. And I think that that's the beauty that we could create through a broader, deeper understanding of Juneteenth.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that you mentioned the military explicitly in that moment. Yeah, because I also come from, on my mom's side, the military family. They were in Fayetteville, you know.
Okay, yeah.
But it's, you know, but the question I was going to ask is related to that. So recently, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a measure with the National Defense Authorization Act that would automatically enroll men 18 to 26 within the selective service. Now, there's a whole bunch of debate about this because technically men have still been enrolled in selective service. They claim this is a way of like consolidating the database of information, blah, 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 blah. But many people have interpreted this as a step back towards the draft, right? And I don't think that that is necessarily a crazy thing to think when we think about the fact that, you know, the U.S. government is losing in the court of public opinion as it relates to Palestine. I think Netanyahu just recently disbanded his war cabinet. Like, there's a whole lot of crap going on, right? But I'm wondering if we could talk about, like, what, if any, lessons does the history of Juneteenth, and even we can bring in the Buffalo Soldiers into this conversation. What does it offer for us as we try to consider and understand what these recent moves the U.S. government is making? Do we, you know, how do you see this move with the selective service? You know, do you see the same kind of panic that other folks are having around it?
The funny part, yes, I do have the panic that people have around it. I'm happy I'm well past that age group, you know what I'm saying, in case this thing goes back into it.
Shout out to sexism.
No, but apparently women too. There's some other stuff in there for women too.
Yeah, but you know, the thing about our community right now, we're probably as diverse as we can imagine. I mean, and so I'm saying that because there's two stories I want to tell. One is just my observation that we're super diverse in the sense that we're even getting people. You know, there's folks in our community that are big P patriotic, right? We're seeing this, and it's cutting across different sectors, right? Even in the reparations movement, you're starting to see a very American particular articulation of the reparation struggle, sans the international, you know, demand, right? Okay, so we have some very, you know, peculiar situations now where we have to grapple with, wait, you're joining the military because you really believe like that there's some great enemy out there that we need to protect against. You do have Black people who are like that. Whereas in previous generations, people were going because of a class struggle. People were going because they need, that's right. They were going because they needed
anti-communists too.
Yes.
A lot of anti-communists.
Well, I was going to get to that. But the anti-communism is also a trade-off, right? You talk about that. I mean, we talked about that. You know this, but and I'm not talking to you. I'm just talking to the issue, right? Of like, damn, you have people who, yes, in that period, and I would even tell my students, sometimes I say that if you need a legitimate, quote unquote, legitimate war, like if you just say in history, what's a legitimate war? Well, you could say in modern times, obviously the Civil War, but then I would say probably World War II, just because of the fascism, right? Just because of the just unbridled fascism. Of course, we know all the derivative entanglements that come with that. And so I'm putting that in quotes, that just, if you need something that's legitimate, I'll give you that one. Because that's the one where people felt like, okay, you know, to Teresa's point about the anti-communism, it's like, all right, well, we're going to support this, but it means that citizenship is going to expand, right? It doesn't mean that we're just coming to be fodder for your imperial project, right? And so that's the part where I'm trying to just suss out, you know? So I think for us right now, we have a very diverse community, people of all kind of walks of life and beliefs in what this thing is. You know, this old notion, the number that you're talking about, that 18 to 25 is one demographic that scares me. The other demographic that scares me is the number of people saying that 25% of Black men are turning to vote for Trump. That's crazy to me. But I think that's also a demographic that frightens me. And that goes to my point about the diversity within our so-called community, right? Within our racialized community. So I think that so that's one piece. The second piece is, my father was a Vietnam veteran from Mississippi and did a whole tour. I was interviewed documentary, upcoming documentary on the Vietnam War and black men's role and black people's role in the Vietnam War. And in St. Louis, because I'm in the citadel of all of American militarism, the history of American militarism is the history of St. Louis. Okay. From the barracks, from stockades, from all the jails and all the kind of stuff. People deployed from here. This is a major outpost of American militarism throughout history. And because of that, at our war memorial, there was recently a memorial to the Vietnam War. And because I have a 13-year-old black son whose grandfather, who he didn't meet, was in this war, I took him to the exhibit. And I wasn't trying to be patriotic, right? But I was trying to just make sure my son understood like what his grandfather was involved with, based on the fact that he's coming from the sharecropping South, right? And so as we were leaving, because I told him about the draft, because they have like a little kiosk there where you can put your birthday in and it'll tell you whether or not you will be drafted if you were back in time. And they'll say, hey, if you're born on this date here, they took the first 300 on this list. And then, and he was like, oh, I wouldn't have been drafted. I said, okay, well, what would you have done? And so then they had the options. You go to college, you did blah, blah, blah. So they had this interactive stuff. So as we were leaving, we were still talking about the draft. And I told him, and he said, so wait, people don't get drafted anymore. And I said, and this is right before this whole thing came out. And I said, well, they could do it, but I said the military technology has advanced so much that they don't really fight ground wars anymore like they were then. And so therefore they don't necessarily need it. This shit just made me a liar, right? And so I was like, because I'm trying to help him understand society's evolution in terms of this, capitalist militaristic technologies that really, makes something that's already unpopular, like a draft. It's already unpopular. It was even unpopular for white families in that time. Has now been brought back, been remixed, right? Potentially. And so I think that that's a concern of mine, for sure. And I just think as a person who read too much Du Bois when I was younger, so that I don't have a bone in my body that thinks that imperial wars are good. There's nothing in me that thinks the imperial war is good and useful. And so for me, I don't like the idea of it just on that level alone, but just in the geopolitical sphere, this is really concerning. And I think that it's something that we should fight. And I think that, the folks who are elected officials should fight this quite forcefully from within their chambers. But who knows? They might believe in this stuff too. Sorry to go on for so long, but that's such a great question, and it brought up so many different thoughts that I've just recently experienced that I want to make sure we share that with the community.
No, I mean, but I think it's this notion of the battle for consciousness, or the battle for ideas, I think is also there too. So Chita Macha mentioned that they used to mandate the registration for males via the FAFSA, but that ended in 2021, which I'm sure impacted their recruitment pool. But we also know that there were two major things that contributed to the sort of explosion of the Black middle class, and it was the GI Bill and Pell Grants, right? And so but so at a particular point in time, and because they've talked about this too, I believe we as millennials are the first generation to do worse than actually financially worse than our previous generations coming out of enslavement. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. Like my grandfather, it was a poverty draft. He was not a sharecropper, but he grew up poor in Columbus, Georgia. He enlisted in the military when he was like 17, 18, and that is what allowed him to pay for his life. He was in the military for 30 years. Then he opened up a transmission shop. That's what he ran for the rest of his life. But that's how he paid for his kids to go to college, his wife to go to college, all these things. But I think what we see now with the military is that they are not even keeping up their own story, because even though I have no support for the military, period. But the little things that they used to promise to military vets is really, most military vets are getting treated like shit. And there are so many who are suffering from PTSD, from all kinds of other things, what they call it, the vet services at the VA hospitals are shitty. Like there are all these other ways in which they can't continue to sell this story that there are all these benefits from voluntarily enlisting into the military. And so this return to the draft to me is also just yet another signal that like this shit is crumbling. Like people are not believing. And it's funny because juxtapose that to this 25% of black men who want to support Trump. But I think that's
bullshit.
That's
no way, because 8% of black men voted for Trump in 20. Nick, people love nothing more than a black male punching bag. Fuck that. There's no fucking way that's true. And mind you, what does that say for the whatever 90% that are voting for Biden's goofy, dumb, genocidal ass? So fuck that. But what I wanted to is
now she got a little snap moment.
because I'm tired of this narrative of like black men are supposed to be backwards based on these dumbass trumped up, no pun intended, pun intended numbers. But I also wonder how effective can a draft be? Because given the obesity of this country, the overall health of this country, the number of especially black males with criminal records. I don't think you go into the military with a criminal record. They might waive that. The very terrible education, because I believe that there is a test that you have to pass. Maybe that's just for officers, but it's like there's all of these social factors that in previous moments would have disqualified a large swath. Not to mention the sexual diversity.
Although, to be fair, my grandfather was functionally illiterate when he went into the military
and
became a sergeant major.
But now it's the majority of the population is, or a plurality is functionally illiterate. So I also wonder, are they just going to suspend those qualifications altogether, or like, are they going to institute the draft and then 12 people got to join?
Listen, they need to start with all the families at January 6th. Okay, start with all of them. And then you can go with everybody else. So once you exhaust all the people who actually want militarism, who actually want to take up arms against governments at home and abroad, okay, start with them.
But the danger of that is that that's precisely how we got to where we are with white nationalism. So many of those people came back, so Kathy Ballou's work, for example. So many of those people came back from Vietnam and came back from the war with weapons, with training, and with even intensified white supremacist orientation. So
there is no out, right? But I think that there's also that part of even during the battle, there was segregation going on. Even within the U.S. side of the battle, there was a racial battle, and many of the black soldiers talked about white Southerners bringing and putting up on U.S. military encampments, putting up the Confederate flag. And there was actual fist fights amongst the soldiers, right? So this is part of the whole mess of it all, right? And so yes, you're absolutely right. And this whole idea of abandoning the veterans when they return home is just the crime of the century, right? That's always just you're going to take people who went and fought on your behalf, and then you're going to leave them hanging when you come back. That's just another form of exploitation. So I think that we've seen that more with people who are comeback amputees, can't return to their regular jobs. You mentioned the PTSD, so absolutely, and I haven't seen anything in terms of the demographic of 18 to 25 or 26 that says that they're going to fix those things, right? So say, hey, we're gonna draft folks, but then we have all this other stuff around it. I haven't heard any of that.
And not to mention the higher rates of domestic violence, police officers and military officials.
But take heart, less and less people that would be draft age are getting married because they can't afford it.
That is also true.
People just roommating up. But so it's all fucked up. It's all fucked up.
It is.
Last question. So we thank you so much for joining us. But the last question, we read around these parts. What we do, we're literates, we study. So what reading recommendations do you have about slavery, Black struggle, or Black history, or podcasts, documentaries, articles, whatever? So what can you recommend for our audience?
Okay, so I pulled a couple things off the shelf. All right. And one, I think, because we were talking about how do we mainstream a lot of this stuff, right? Like, how do we get it? How do we scale up, with this information. One book I think I really enjoy, and like you, Cherise, promised to do a review and that I have not gotten to.
Oh yeah, I like that.
This one here, okay, Paul Ortiz. So if the listeners, have y'all did a book group on this already?
No, we haven't done a book reading together. We just cite what we're reading and share.
Yeah.
Okay. And then this one here, this one has been fun, and this guy is also a fun follow on social media, and that's the
Michael Harriot.
I got this one down, and I said, Sharice is gonna hate this one.
And do
because I could have brought my whole Palestine library, you know what I'm saying? But we're talking about how do we get this to the mainstream? We're on a mainstream holiday, you know what I'm saying? So I said, okay, let's do something a little more fun. But I knew one of my favorite people on the planet was gonna throw shade on that one for sure.
Absolutely. You know me so well.
Oh my goodness.
But the thing about the Harriet thing was I was thinking about folks want to learn about St. Louis. They should read The Broken Heart of America by Walter Johnson.
Yes.
Brilliant book. And I moved to St. Louis in 2018, and there wasn't a full narrative of St. Louis history that you could find in the book. There was the ones little pamphlets you could find in Barnes and Nobles and stuff like that. There were, Keona Irving's work on the 1930s, women in St. Louis. There was Clarence Lang's work on the 40s, right? But you didn't have like a full, picture of what St. Louis was. And then, of course, there's bits and pieces that we've learned over the years. Mm-hmm. And there's a wonderful project going on right now at the Missouri History Museum, thinking about the Mill Creek Valley area, which is an area that was decimated, by American capital and by neglect and by, poor social policy, public policy, that basically left a lot of Black folks, on the run. They had to move, from the area of Midtown in St. Louis, where part of St. Louis University actually sits on. And there's a new exhibit that really explores that history as well. So I think, there's a lot of stuff, but I love Johnson's book because it tries to do like a comprehensive sweep, from the 19th century to the present day, walking you all the way up to Michael Brown's murder. And I think, from the indigenous inheritance of this area all the way through the tragedies that we've been dealing with, police brutality in the modern day. So I thought that book was great. But yeah, I think that there's all we have to do. I think not all we have to do, but one of the things we always have to do is always commit ourselves to deep study. And I think the more that we can do that, the more informed we'll be. We can tell these stories more and more and more, disrupt easy narratives of the things that we celebrate and believe in. And so, those are two that I think try to do that. But I was telling my students about the fact that they missed out on the whole people's history of whatever movement. Mm-hmm. And, that was the first iteration of the AP African American Studies movement, if you not calling it a real movement, but that effort to democratize knowledge, to really disrupt easy narratives of American society in the 90s. That was Paul, Howard Zinn and the People's History group. But we don't have that anymore. And so when I ask my students who is Howard Zinn, they're like, who's that? Right, for example. And so, I don't blame them, but that's what we're here for, is just to kind of make sure they get up to date. But when the technological explosion happened, a huge gap in knowledge happened. And so they missed out on some of the things I think would have helped them understand the current day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. This has been a Black Radical Brunch. Yes. Too bad you couldn't get waffles.
I know. I wish I could be in the house, you know what I'm saying? Chilling.
Yeah.
But thank you for having me. And it's always great to see you, CBS and Layla.
Likewise.
And, you guys are doing some incredible work. So salute to you.
Knocked out.
And the little one.
Oh.
She got all tuckered out.
She was like, getting fussy towards the end. You can tell she's sleepy.
Yeah. All right. Thanks,
well, thank you so much.
To have you back, because we need
to
talk about your book.
For sure. Anytime.
All right.
Take care.
Peace.
All right, y'all. Well, just in case you missed it at the beginning of the show, we announced. So this is episode 15. This is going to be our, I don't know if it's mid-season 1 or the end of season 1 hiatus, but we will not be back for July. We will likely be back for Black August, but look out for announcements and things. But also just keep us posted about your reading. Share.
We'll still post every week about what we've read on our Instagram. So follow our Instagram. Yes. What is it? LSR_podcast.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Email us. You got our emails. Happy Juneteenth.
Go do something radical
push
for
a
the
white
Black
person
people.
down.
We were on the same page, but no, we were in the same book. We were on the same page.
Yeah, it's in the same book. I'm just kidding. Read you something, eat you something good,
yes.
Spend time with loved ones, organize, all
Fight
the things.
wins.
Exactly. All
right, y'all. See y'all later.
Peace.
Oh shoot. Let me do this.